September 21, 2001. 10 days after the worst terrorist attack in American history, Washington, D.C. is still smoking. The Pentagon has a hole in its side from where a plane hit. That morning, inside the Defense Intelligence Agency, the most senior Cuba analyst in the entire U.S. military drives her red Toyota to work. She is 44 years old. She takes antidepressants to manage stress. She listens to anxiety relief tapes at night. She sees a psychiatrist. Her colleagues respect her enormously. Her bosses have given her 10 separate awards for excellence. The CIA director himself once handed her one of the intelligence community's highest honors personally. She is also, at this exact moment, about to receive classified briefings on America's imminent invasion of Afghanistan. War plans that she intends to pass directly to Cuba, which would share them with America's enemies. She will never make it to that briefing because the FBI is waiting for her inside. Her name is Ana Belén Montes, and for exactly 17 years she has been the most dangerous spy inside the United States government. A Puerto Rican woman from Baltimore who grew up in a military family, attended top universities, passed every polygraph, earned every promotion, and spent her lunch breaks memorizing America's most classified secrets to type up at home and hand to Havana. Ana Belén Montes was born on February 28, 1957, at the U.S. Army Hospital in Nuremberg. Her father, Alberto Montes, was stationed there as an army doctor. The family returned to the United States in 1958 and eventually settled in Maryland. By any external measure, Ana Montes grew up in exactly the kind of patriotic, service-oriented American household you'd imagine. Her father was a military officer. Her brother Tito would become an FBI agent. Her sister Lucy would become an FBI translator and would later, by an astonishing twist of fate, be assigned specifically to a task force hunting Cuban spies. Ana was brilliant and driven. She graduated from the University of Virginia. She got a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, one of the most elite foreign policy graduate programs in the country. And somewhere along the way, between the lecture halls and the politics seminars, and the year spent living abroad in Madrid as an undergraduate, something in Ana Montes curdled. She became consumed by what she saw as American imperialism in Latin America, the Reagan administration's support for the Nicaraguan Contras, the U.S. involvement in El Salvador and Guatemala. To Ana, this wasn't foreign policy. It was atrocity. She spoke about it openly, loudly, at work, at school, at dinner. She didn't hide it. And in Washington, D.C. in the early 1980s, that kind of passion attracted a very specific kind of attention. At Johns Hopkins, Ana Montes met a woman named Marta Rita Velázquez. On the surface, they were natural friends. Two women of Puerto Rican heritage, both sharp, both politically engaged, both furious about U.S. policy in Central America. They studied together. They graduated together in 1984. What Ana didn't know was that Marta Velázquez was already a Cuban intelligence agent. She had been recruited in 1983 after a trip to Mexico City to meet Cuban intelligence officers. And now her job was to find the next one. She found Ana. The Cubans understood something crucial about recruitment. The best spies aren't people who need money or who are running from something. The best spies are people who believe. People who have a cause so deeply embedded in their identity that betraying their country doesn't feel like betrayal at all. It feels like conscience. In December 1984, Velázquez introduced Ana to a Cuban intelligence officer at a dinner in New York City. The officer presented himself as a diplomat from the Cuban mission to the United Nations. He told Ana they needed someone to translate Spanish-language news articles about Nicaragua into English. It was, of course, a lie, but Ana wasn't really listening to the details. Later, U.S. investigators would report that at that dinner, the 27-year-old Ana Montes unhesitatingly agreed to work through the Cubans to help Nicaragua. Unhesitatingly. Not after days of agonizing. Not after a long internal moral struggle. That same evening, that same dinner. The first thing the Cubans did was ask her to write her autobiography. It was framed as a way to understand her better. It was actually insurance, collateral the Cuban intelligence service could use against her if she ever tried to get out. She didn't know that. Or maybe she did, and didn't care. In March 1985, Ana Montes and Marta Velázquez flew to Madrid on what looked like a spring break trip. They flew under their own names, but when they landed, a Cuban agent was waiting with false passports. They flew from Madrid to Prague, a Cold War layover designed to obscure their travel trail, and then from Prague to Havana. In Cuba, 2 Cuban intelligence operatives were waiting. Those operatives had themselves been trained by the Soviets, inheritors of the KGB's tradecraft, applied now to a small island nation that had turned human intelligence into a fine art. Over the following days, the Cubans taught Ana Montes everything she would need to know. How to detect surveillance. Walking into a shop, browsing, doubling back to check whether anyone was following. How to use the National Zoo in Washington as a counter-surveillance route, wandering among the animals, watching who watched her back. How to communicate using shortwave radio, encrypted broadcasts from Havana that she would decode using a cipher key. How to type messages on water-soluble paper. How to meet handlers for dim sum in upper northwest Washington while appearing to anyone watching like a government analyst taking a lunch break. And how to defeat a polygraph. The Cubans taught her that too. The technique, she would later tell investigators, involves the strategic tensing of specific muscles during the control questions, the baseline questions the machine uses to calibrate normal physiological responses. The idea is to create false stress during the non-deceptive portions of the test, so the deceptive portions look normal by comparison. In March 1994, after nearly a decade of active espionage, Ana Montes walked into a DIA counterintelligence polygraph examination and passed it. She returned from Cuba and did one more thing before starting her career as a spy. She applied to the Defense Intelligence Agency, listing Marta Velázquez as a character reference. Cuban intelligence had helped prepare her application. She started work at the DIA on September 30th, 1985. From her very first day inside the Pentagon, she was already theirs. The DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. While the CIA gathers intelligence for the president and policymakers, the DIA does it for the military. Troop movements, weapon systems, war plans. The kind of information that, in the wrong hands, doesn't just embarrass a government, it gets soldiers killed. Ana Montes started as an entry-level analyst covering Latin American affairs. She was exceptional. Her reports were precise, well-sourced, and genuinely authoritative. Her colleagues trusted her expertise completely, which was reasonable. She knew more about Cuba than almost anyone in the building. She had a direct line to Havana. Of course she knew more. She rose through the ranks steadily. By the late 1990s, she had become the DIA's senior Cuba analyst, the single most authoritative American intelligence voice on Cuban military capabilities. When the Pentagon needed to know what Cuba was doing, they asked Ana Montes. And at the same time, 3 times a week in her Cleveland Park condominium, she pulled a shortwave radio from her closet and decoded encrypted messages broadcast from Havana. She memorized classified documents during the day and typed them up at night. She met her Cuban handler for lunch every 2 to 3 weeks. Dim-sum restaurants, casual, unremarkable. She transferred the information onto encrypted computer disks and handed them over. She accepted no salary from Cuba, no payments, no wire transfers, no cash drops, except occasional reimbursements for expenses. She wasn't doing it for money. She was doing it because she believed, with the conviction of a person whose moral universe had been organized entirely around a single idea, that what she was doing was right. Her co-worker, Chris Simmons, the DIA spy catcher who would eventually track her down, said it plainly. She was in the top 10 the Cubans ever ran, and a lot of what she passed on, the Cubans shared with the Russians and the Chinese. There's no way to calculate how much Russia and others gained from her. Now, here is where the story gets truly uncomfortable. On March 31st, 1987, guerrillas from the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front launched a devastating attack on the El Paraíso military base in El Salvador. 43 Salvadoran soldiers were killed. So was a United States Army Green Beret, Staff Sergeant Gregory A. Fronius. Military investigators and DIA counterintelligence analysts have since concluded that the attack benefited from insider knowledge. Just weeks before the attack, Ana Montes had visited El Paraíso as part of an official analyst orientation trip. She had received detailed classified briefings on the base's security layout and operations. In February 1996, the Cuban Air Force shot down 2 unarmed civilian aircraft operated by Brothers to the Rescue, a Cuban-American organization that flew over the Florida Straits searching for and rescuing Cuban refugees at sea. 4 Cuban-American men were killed over international waters. The shoot-down was an act of cold-blooded murder. Ana Montes had been called to the Pentagon to help evaluate the United States response options. Midway through the crisis, she received a phone call that visibly shook her. She left her post earlier than allowed, citing exhaustion, an extraordinary breach of protocol during a Joint Chiefs emergency. The next morning, a Cuban intelligence handler broke his own protocol by waiting for her on the street near her home to get an urgent debrief. He needed to know whether the U.S. was about to launch cruise missiles at Cuba. She had been feeding them information about the crisis in real time through the night. While American military commanders were deciding how to respond to a murder, her DIA colleague, Reg Brown, noticed. He called it in. In April 1996, DIA counterintelligence analyst Reg Brown contacted Scott Carmichael, the DIA's mole hunter, and told him something felt wrong about Ana Montes. She had left her post during the Brothers to the Rescue crisis. She had been unusually aggressive in accessing classified information. Something was off. Carmichael listened. He passed Brown's concerns to the FBI. The FBI looked at the circumstantial evidence and showed little interest. 6 months later, with more warning signs accumulating, they agreed to let Carmichael interview her. On November 7, 1996, Carmichael sat across from Ana Montes and questioned her about possible Cuban intelligence influence. She denied everything. She deflected. She even offered the name of a Georgetown University professor she suggested might be the actual spy, a classic counterintelligence move, turning the conversation towards someone else. Carmichael later said he could tell she was hiding something, but he had no proof. His supervisors were unconvinced. By Thanksgiving 1996, the case was formally closed, and here is the detail that should make you sit up straight. Just 3 months after that interview, 3 months after she had been questioned about being a Cuban spy and gotten away with it, CIA Director George Tenet personally presented Ana Montes with the National Intelligence Certificate of Distinction on February 21, 1997, one of the highest awards in the American intelligence community, handed to her by the head of the CIA, barely 90 days after a DIA mole hunter had looked her in the eye and known she was lying. She framed it. It hung on her wall. For 4 more years, she continued. The break came not from the DIA, not from the FBI, but from the National Security Agency, America's signals intelligence arm, the agency that monitors electronic communications worldwide. In late 2000, NSA analysts decrypting Cuban intelligence communications identified something alarming. There was a highly placed mole inside the U.S. government. They didn't know who. They had a profile, a pattern, a set of behavioral signatures. The FBI opened a full-field investigation. Using FISA court authority, agents entered Ana Montes' apartment covertly multiple times while she was at work. What they found on her laptop was extraordinary. She had left communications, encrypted messages, drafts of reports to her Cuban handlers, not destroyed, not wiped, just sitting there. Intelligence officials would later describe her tradecraft in the final years as increasingly careless, the telltale sign of a person whose double life had been grinding them down for almost 2 decades. She took antidepressants. She saw a psychiatrist. She listened to anxiety tapes at night. The machine in her head that had been running 2 parallel realities since 1985 was starting to seize. The FBI had enough, but they wanted more. Specifically, they wanted to catch her meeting her handlers face to face. They followed her on weekends. They watched her use payphones with pre-programmed codes to arrange meetings. They tracked the dim sum lunches. They assembled the full picture. And then, on September 11, 2001, everything changed. The attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon reshuffled the entire American security apparatus overnight. Within days, the DIA was pivoting toward Afghanistan. And Ana Montes, the DIA's top Cuba analyst, now with a top-secret clearance and access to special intelligence programs, was about to be briefed on America's classified war plans for the invasion of Afghanistan. Plans that, as Chris Simmons explained, Cuba would have happily traded to the Taliban. The FBI could not wait for a face-to-face meeting with her handler. They moved. September 21, 2001. 10 days after 9/11, Ana Montes pulls her red Toyota into the DIA parking lot. She plans to spend the morning memorizing documents and the evening typing them up. It is, to her, an ordinary day. She is called down from her office to a conference room for what is described as a routine meeting. 2 FBI agents are waiting. She shows no emotion as they arrest her. No surprise, no panic, no tears. She has been expecting this moment for 17 years. Not certain it would come, but always knowing it could. FBI agent Peter Lapp, who led the investigation, said later, "I believe she had planned for that day, if it happened, for 17 years. She demanded a lawyer. She said nothing else." In her apartment, FBI agents found the evidence they needed. The shortwave radio, the encrypted cipher key, a laptop containing message drafts to and from her handlers that she had carelessly failed to delete, foreign currency, several passports, because when Ana wanted to visit Cuba, she would fly to Europe, put on a wig, switch to a Cuban passport, and fly to Havana. She had been doing this for years in plain sight from Washington, D.C. She had also revealed the existence of a top-secret American surveillance satellite program, reportedly the NRO Black program codenamed Misty, a stealth satellite system so classified that most people inside the U.S. intelligence community didn't know it existed. She had handed it to Cuba. Cuba had shared it with Russia and China. On March 19, 2002, Ana Belén Montes pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage. The charge could have carried the death penalty. Under her plea agreement, prosecutors did not seek it. On October 16, 2002, Judge Ricardo Urbina sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison. At her sentencing, she read a statement. She showed no remorse. "I believe our government's policy towards Cuba is cruel and unfair," she told the court. "I felt morally obligated to help the island defend itself from our efforts to impose our values and our political system on it. I obeyed my conscience rather than the law." Ana Montes did not feel guilty. She felt righteous. She genuinely believed, with the certainty of someone whose moral compass had been calibrated entirely around a single political conviction, that she was the one doing the right thing, that the United States was the villain, that Cuba was the victim, that she was, in some essential way, on the side of justice. Michelle Van Cleve, the head of U.S. counterintelligence under President George W. Bush, told Congress in 2012 that Montes was one of the most damaging spies the United States has ever found. She compromised, Van Cleve said, virtually everything the U.S. knew about Cuba and how it operated there. She shaped intelligence assessments at the highest levels. There are analysts who believe she influenced President Clinton's administration into underestimating the Cuban military threat by deliberately distorting her own reporting. She may have caused the death of an American soldier in 1987. She was complicit in the murder of 4 Cuban Americans in 1996. She did all of it for free, and she felt good about it. On January 6, 2023, Ana Belén Montes walked out of prison. She was 65 years old. She went to Puerto Rico, where she has sympathetic family, and where a small community of supporters have been waiting for her. She is under 5 years of probation with strict conditions. She released a statement in Spanish, encouraging those interested in her case to instead focus on the problems facing Puerto Ricans and the U.S. economic embargo on Cuba. She has not apologized. As far as anyone can tell, she hasn't changed her mind. "I'm a human being with needs that I couldn't deny," she once said of her choice to spy. "I thought the Cubans would understand."